Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Blair Jackson. I'm the director of Christchurch Art Gallery Te Pūnera Waifetu. It's my absolute pleasure this afternoon to welcome you to our final keynote and to introduce our next speaker, Kaila Colbin. My first opportunity to hear Kaila was at an annual City Council Team Leaders workshop I attended a couple of years ago. Now, these workshops aren't really known for an exciting day out of the office as a rule. However, Kaila's presentation on exponential technological growth had me instantly engaged. The future she described wasn't off in the distance, it was right here upon us now. The way we work, play, think about the world was about to change. My mind was blown. On the strength of that presentation, I attended the 2016 Singularity University Summit here in Christchurch, and my mind was further expanded, but somewhat frightened, but hugely excited as well. I began to think about what this meant for my role and what my role looked like in the future that Kaila described. Would art and museums still be relevant? How would we respond as an industry to new technologies and changing patterns in work and social life? Is it too late for me to take up coding? Are my children doing the right degrees? Could a robot replace me? Could artificial intelligence make art or curate an exhibition? Now, Kaila Colbin is a graduate from Cornell University, a co-founder and trustee of the amazing non-profit Ministry of Awesome here in Christchurch, as well as a curator of TEDx Christchurch and TEDx Scott Base, a director of Christchurch New Zealand. Kaila is the deputy chair of Core Education Limited and is a New Zealand and Australian ambassador for Singularity University. She's also a founder and a director of New Zealand social media consultancy Missing Link. Kaila describes herself as a creative entrepreneur with a passion for extraordinary experiences and a fanaticism for excellent communication. A bridge builder between possibility and practicality. But what I love most about the way that Kaila describes her purpose in life is to be an uplifting presence. Thank you. Thank you, Kaila.
Thank you, Blair. Hi, guys. Thank you. Can I just say, is this not the most stunning venue imaginable? We hosted TEDx Christchurch here twice, including one year we had Carolina Itzo come and speak, who led the restoration of that absolutely phenomenal dome. Those of you guys who are sitting way up the back, you have no idea what you're missing. Next time you come into this theater, come sit at the front, look up at the beautiful dome, and then go home and watch Carolina Itzo's TEDx Christchurch talk about the restoration of that dome. Thank you for that kind introduction, Blair, and my apologies to the lovely Philippa, who is doing the signed translation of my talk. I speak really quickly. I don't know that I'll be able to slow it down, and can we please just get a round of applause for her now in advance, because she's gonna, I'm afraid her hands might fall off by the end of this talk. I want to start by highlighting something Blair mentioned in his introduction, which is that I'm Christchurch-based. I'm a Kiwi. I've been living here for over 13 years. I became a citizen in 2013. This is my home. I live about 18 minutes drive from this very spot. And I think it's important to call this out because I know you can tell from my accent that I'm not from here originally, and the alternative is a little embarrassing just at present. I know as soon as I say that I'm from America, what everybody's thinking, which is what the heck is going on over there? And I bring this up not to make a political point. There might be people in this room who are Trump supporters. It's none of my business, although we should talk. But more because it's just so surprising that he's the president, right? Like, it's been over a year and still you're like, really? He's president? And that's not mean, like, he was surprised when he won. Like, everybody was surprised by this, right? Every poll, every pundit, every editorial, like, everybody had this election going the other way. Nate Silver, the guru statistician who rose to fame in the 2012 election for correctly anticipating every one of the 50 states, the morning of the 2016 election, this is how he had it pegged. 71% Clinton, 28% Trump. Everybody got this wrong, except for this fish. which correctly ate off of a picture of Donald Trump instead of one of Hillary Clinton. And this artificially intelligent predictive system, which correctly anticipated the results of the election weeks out. So this is the kind of thing that's interesting to me. How is it possible that the humans are getting it so wrong and the computers are getting it so right? So as Blair said, I'm involved with an organization called Singularity University. Singularity University is based in Silicon Valley, housed at the NASA Ames Research Center, which is a crazy and surreal place. This is a giant hangar that's on campus at NASA Ames. To give you an idea of scale, if you can see that tiny yellow dot in the bottom left corner, that's a road sign. So this huge thing was built to house fully inflated blimps. The entire front of it opens up to let the blimps in and out. It's just, the whole place is just really trippy. Surreal. Singularity University was founded by these two guys, and these guys are really kind of titans of the tech world. The guy on the right is Peter Diamandis. He started a company called X Prize Foundation. X Prize does large cash prizes for extremely ambitious but extremely well-bounded engineering challenges. So the first one that they did was a $10 million prize for the first private group that could get a manned vehicle to space and back, land it safely, and then repeat that feat within 2 weeks. And that prize is what led to Virgin Galactic, it's what led to SpaceX. Like pretty much the entire private space industry was kickstarted by this large cash prize. And they've gone on to replicate that model in all sorts of industries and all sorts of endeavors. They've used it for healthcare, for education, for drought. And they found that as a model for spurring investment into R&D and innovation, it's tremendously effective. They put up this large prize, they put up a challenge that is ambitious enough to stir men's souls, and the teams who are competing for the prize will collectively invest anywhere from 10 to 100 times the value of that prize. Think about that for a second. $10 million prize, $100 million to $1 billion worth of investment in trying to address that challenge. Not only that, but you get hundreds of perspectives on the issue rather than just one. Peter's done all sorts of other things as well. He started a company called Human Longevity, Inc. with J. Craig Venter, who decoded the human genome. He started International Space University. He started a company called Planetary Resources, which is mining asteroids. He wrote the bestsellers Bold and Abundance. He's a very, very accomplished guy, but the guy on the left is even more relevant to this afternoon's conversation. His name is Ray Kurzweil, and he invented everything. Seriously, he invented flatbed scanners. He invented optical character recognition. He invented text-to-speech for blind people. He invented the Kurzweil synthesizer. He's got 21 honorary doctorates. He's received honors from 3 US presidents. He's written 7 books, 5 of them bestsellers. He's a director of engineering at Google, like total underachiever. But one of the most interesting things about Ray is that they've gone back and looked at the predictions he's made about where technology is going since the late 80s, early 90s. And they found that he has an astonishing 86% accuracy rate. 86%, it's a tremendous achievement. If you think about some of the dramatic technological changes we've seen over the past 20, 30 years, 86%, it's really quite phenomenal. To the degree that he predicted that by 1998, a computer would beat a human at chess. And of course, in 1997, IBM's Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov to that level of specificity. So when Ray Kurzweil says something about where technology is going, generally worth paying attention to him. So I first got involved with SU, we call it, Singularity University. I first got involved with SU almost 3.5 years ago now. I did their executive program. It's a 6-day program at their headquarters at NASA Ames. And I'll tell you what, as Blair said, one of the other hats that I wear is that I run our local TEDx event. And my job as curator of a TEDx event is to be across new innovation. It's to pay, the T in TED stands for technology. Like my job is to pay attention to this stuff. And so when I went to SU, I thought, this is going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure I'm going to learn a bunch of stuff. I did not expect it to completely transform my entire understanding of the world that we're living in and the world that we're living into. But of course, that's exactly what happened. I came away completely transformed by the experience. I came away feeling a sense of urgency and responsibility to help more people understand what I had learned, because there is not a single one of us who isn't touched by this stuff. It affects our economy, it affects our government, it affects our healthcare system, our education system. As Blair said, everything about the way we live, work, play is affected by these technological changes. It affects our kids and our kids' kids, and it is unconscionable to me that we are making decisions about the kind of future we are creating, or that we're leaving the decisions about the kind of future we're creating to a handful of rich old white guys in Silicon Valley. Like, that's just not okay. So I shifted pretty much the entire trajectory of my career to helping more people understand this stuff. And my job over the next half hour or so is to condense everything I learned in those 6 days into 3 core insights. And the first one starts with this guy. So this is Gordon Moore. He's one of the co-founders of Intel Corporation, and in 1965, he made the observation that the number of transistors we could fit on an integrated circuit had been doubling every 18 months as far back as we could see. And he made a prediction that that number would continue to double as far forward as we could see. This became known as Moore's Law. Some of you might have heard of it. I saw one guy perk up right away when I said Gordon Moore. So the first insight comes from Ray Kurzweil, he of the 86% accuracy rate. And what Kurzweil said was, hang on a minute, what if it's not actually about transistors at all? So fun fact you may not know about Moore's Law, Gordon Moore made his famous prediction based on a data set of 4. He had 4 data points. But Kurzweil zoomed out on Moore's Law. He said, what if, instead of looking at the number of transistors we can fit on an integrated circuit, we look instead at what we might call the price performance of computing? How many million instructions per second can you buy for $1,000? Turns out that number has been doubling for almost 120 years. Starting way back with the beginning of computing with electromechanical punch cards, moving on to relays and then vacuum tubes and then transistors and only then integrated circuits. Moore's Law is actually the 5th iteration of this underlying doubling paradigm, not the first. By the way, this is a chart on a log scale, meaning the y-axis, instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, goes 1, 10, 100, 1,000. A straight line on a log scale is an exponential curve. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay, cool. Kurzweil called this phenomenon the law of accelerating returns. Here's a way to think about it. Today, for $1,000, you can buy roughly the number of instructions per second that a mouse brain can process. But according to Kurzweil, by about 2023, just 5 years from now, for $1,000, you'll be able to buy the number of instructions per second that a human brain can process. And by 2049, for $1,000, you'll be able to buy the number of instructions per second of all human brains on the planet combined. This doubling curve explains why you today, via the smartphone in your pocket, have access to more information than Bill Clinton had the entire time that he was president of the United States. I reckon that's why he looks kind of pissed off in this picture. Wish I had an iPhone. Although I'm sure he's super glad Instagram was not a thing when he was around. Dodged a bullet, Bill. Right, okay, insight number 1, not just about the transistors, it's about the price performance of computing. Insight number 2 is that it's not just about computing. This doubling phenomenon applies to any technology once it becomes what we call information enabled. Think about something like photography. Photography used to be substrate enabled. It was dependent on the physical film for you to do the thing. And then it became information enabled, dependent instead on ones and zeros. And once that happened, it started to follow a doubling in price performance, much like computing. The first digital camera had a resolution of 0.01 megapixel. Today you can get a 41 megapixel camera as part of a smartphone, and we just think that's normal. So some of the technologies that have become information enabled that are now starting to follow doubling curves, computing obviously the base one, but also artificial intelligence, robotics, biotechnology, nanotechnology, gene sequencing, neuroscience, energy, all becoming powered by information, powered by ones and zeros, and all starting to follow similar doubling curves. So what is so important about a doubling curve? Why should we care? Well, it turns out they have a few characteristics that actually make them kind of imperative to pay attention to, and the first one is that they look flat for a really long time. And you'll know this if you've ever tried to do that trick where you fold a piece of paper in half 8 times. Anybody ever try that trick? First fold is easy, second fold is easy, third fold is easy, 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 easy. Like, this trick is so dumb, why am I even doing it? It's so easy. And it's not until you hit that 6th, 7th, 8th fold of the paper that things start to get a little crazy. And so as a result of this, they are inherently deceptive. The second characteristic is that our brains are totally not wired for this stuff. We evolved on the savannah chasing prey and running from predators that behaved in a predictable, linear fashion. We evolved to understand that a lion could run from that end of the room to that end of the room, not to understand that a lion could run from that end of the room to the moon. And so as a result, the experts continue to predict linear, no matter how much evidence we have to the contrary. Gordon Moore himself twice said that Moore's law was over. Both times proven wrong. Like the guy who invented the law, he cannot get his own law right. So I don't know what hope the rest of us have. But the difference between something following a linear trajectory and something following a doubling curve is insane. 30 linear steps and we're back out in the foyer. 30 doubling steps and we're 26 times around the planet. And the tricky thing here is that you're not halfway until the 29th step. So it's really hard to measure progress as you go. I don't think there's a single person in this room, myself included, who could correctly guess where we would be at step 15 of this process. Our brains do not work this way. And so when we see doubling curves in action, we have to be systematic and disciplined in our assessment and our analysis of them if we want to have a hope of being able to respond effectively. When I first came back from SU, I started giving these talks, and I would always include some like whiz-bangy technology, like, oh my gosh, can you believe this technology is already here? Isn't that crazy? That's not what I want you to take away from my talk. The critical message I want you to take away from my talk has nothing to do with what technology is available today or even at any given point in time. The critical message I want you to take away from my talk is how technology changes over time. And now that I've been doing this for a while, I've had kind of a front row seat to see what this looks like, and I want to talk you through it using just one example, which is autonomous vehicles. So when I came back from SU, March of 2015, I started giving these talks, and at that time, most people I talked to sort of knew that Google had a self-driving car project on the go. In terms of like public awareness of self-driving vehicles, that's pretty much where we're at. In June of that year, June 2015, Google's self-driving car program hit 1 million miles traveled total. Awesome, huge milestone for them, literally and figuratively. Amazing result. In October that year, October 2015, Tesla released a push update to owners of their Model S vehicle. This is a Tesla Model S. Push update, meaning it was delivered overnight wirelessly while you slept, didn't have to do anything to get it. You woke up in the morning and your car had autopilot functionality. By May the following year, less than a year after Google had logged 1 million miles traveled total, Tesla was collecting 1 million miles of data every 10 hours. By December that year, they had logged more than 1.3 billion miles worth of data. December that year, 2016, here in Christchurch, the airport took possession of a self-driving shuttle. It's a French shuttle from a company called Navia in partnership with a New Zealand company called HMI. A couple months after they took possession, I caught up with Malcolm Johns, the chief executive of the airport, and Dave Verma from HMI. I'm like, guys, what's happening with the shuttle? Does it work? Is it good? Does the tech, are you using it? Tell me what's going on with the shuttle. And they're like, Kaila, the technology works awesome. The shuttle is great. We love it. No problem with the technology. Exactly what we hoped. They said, you wouldn't believe what the actual hurdles are to adoption of this kind of technology. For example, in New Zealand, there is no law that says that you have to have a human behind the wheel of your vehicle. Not because we're particularly forward-thinking, largely because we never fathomed that you could ever not have a human behind the wheel of your vehicle. There is a law that says that you have to have a rego in your front windscreen. So this is an electric vehicle, has an electric drivetrain, goes equally in either direction, doesn't really distinguish between front and back. It effectively has two fronts, and you're not allowed to have two regos. Again, I don't think the people who came up with this rule were trying to be obstructive when they came up with it, right? They just never contemplated this scenario. So when you think about what has to happen for technology to become ubiquitous, it's not enough that the technology is ready. The regulatory environment has to be ready. The market environment has to be ready. The investment environment has to be ready. And when all those things start to line up, that's when every bell, whistle, alarm, and flag should start going off for you that the technology is about to go from deception into chaos and amazement seemingly overnight. When I say seemingly overnight, I mean seemingly overnight, right? So we spent, I just talked you through 2 years in autonomous vehicle technology. 2 months ago in Christchurch, we launched autonomous flying taxis. So we live in the future right here in New Zealand. Okay, that's one example of change over time. I'm gonna give you another example of change over time. In March of 2016, an artificially intelligent Go player by the name of DeepMind, by the name of AlphaGo, sorry, from a company called DeepMind, which has since been bought by Google, which is now owned by Alphabet. It's very tricky to keep track of all these chains. Anyway, so AlphaGo, artificially intelligent Go player from DeepMind, beat the world champion Lee Sedol at the game of Go. This was a massive, massive accomplishment. Go is an intensely complex game. The number of potential moves in Go greater than the number of atoms in the universe. This accomplishment happened fully a decade before the researchers expected it to happen. A year later, DeepMind came out with a new artificially intelligent Go player. It's called AlphaGo Zero. So the original AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol. That's a picture of Lee Sedol realizing he's just lost his job. The original AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol 4 games to 1. AlphaGo Zero beat AlphaGo 100 games to 0, which is amazing by itself, but what's even more interesting is how they trained this AI. So typically, if you have an AI, you want to train it, what you have to do is feed it a whole bunch of data. Right? So if you want to train an artificial intelligence to recognize pictures of cats, you feed it millions of pictures of cats and millions of pictures of not cats, and you tell it, these are cats, these are not cats. And it starts to parse all of that data, and it says, okay, cats have 2 pointy ears, but maybe one of them's chewed off, so they also have eyes that are this shape, and whiskers that look like this, and a nose that looks like that, and maybe it's someone holding a picture of a cat, so it also has a body and a tail, you know, so it basically learns to kind of parse all this data and recognize what makes a cat and what doesn't. And with the original AlphaGo, that's exactly what they did. They fed it 40 million historic games of Go, and it parsed all of that data, chewed it up, spat it out, and basically figured out in any given situation, what is the best move for me to make. But with AlphaGo Zero, they didn't feed it a single game. They gave it the rules, and they gave it the desired outcome. And it played itself. Starting with random play, literally any move will do. It played itself 4.9 million times, and within 3 days was the best Go player in the world. It's not about what technology is available at any given point in time. It's about how technology changes over time. Okay, insight number 1. Not just about the transistors, it's about the price performance of computing. Insight number 2, not just about computing, it's about any information-enabled technology. Insight number 3 is that these technologies are now starting to converge. So now I have to consider what happens when an exponential progression in something like artificial intelligence converges with an exponential progression in something like robotics, and we get super intelligent robots. What happens when an exponential progression in biotechnology or bioengineering converges with an exponential progression in 3D printing at the atomic scale? And we can literally print matter atom by atom. And of course, what happens is that everything accelerates even faster. What does all of this add up to? Huge opportunity. Opportunity like nothing we've seen before in human history. Opportunity to solve for things like healthcare, like education, like energy, to make these things free and abundant for everyone. But that opportunity comes along with a not insignificant amount of terror. In 2000, actually, you know what? I'm going to talk you through just 4 of the things that keep me up at night. I stay up at night a lot, and if I stay up at night, you should stay up at night. So I'm going to just share with you 4 of the things that keep me up at night. The first one is technological unemployment. In 2013, a now famous paper from Frey and Osborne suggested that 47 to 81% of jobs, as we currently understand them, would be under threat from technology, from automation within 20 years. In 2015, the Chartered Accountants of Australia and New Zealand said that that number was 46% of New Zealand jobs within 20 years. You might have seen this headline from about a year and a half ago. Apple's Foxconn factory in China, they fired 60,000 people, replaced them with robots. This is a terrible headline. It's a terrible story. These are real people with real lives, real families. I don't want to diminish or dismiss at all the impact on them. To be fair, 60,000 people in China it's pretty much a rounding error, right? In December that year, December 2016, Foxconn released a 3-part strategy to automate all of their factories. Foxconn employs 1.2 million people. And if you think they can't do this, they absolutely can. This factory in Dongguan in China, they fired 90% of their staff, replaced them with robots. Output went up 2.5 times, defects down 80%. They went from 650 people to 60 people. And the scary thing for me is I look at this headline and I think, if I'm the factory owner or the chief executive, of course I'm going to buy the robots, right? You'd be crazy not to. And if you're not buying the robots, your competition's going to buy the robots and they're going to put you out of business. But that decision that makes total sense in isolation, in aggregate, has potentially terrible consequences for society. Also, to be fair, for those of us in the Western world, this is a plot line that we've heard before. We've heard this narrative. This story is 200 years old, right? Factory workers replaced by automation. That story goes way back. We're a little bit less used to stories like this one, artificially intelligent lawyer hired by its first law firm. Or this one, artificially intelligent chatbot successfully contests 160,000 parking tickets in New York and London. I love this story. This is a free service. It was created by a 19-year-old kid. It's called Do Not Pay. Or this one, artificially intelligent teaching assistant helps students online for an entire semester and nobody noticed. And the reason these stories are becoming possible is because the cognitive capabilities of the computers are now starting to get so good that they are encroaching on domains that have historically been exclusively reserved for humans. I will say, on the topic of technological unemployment, this is something we can talk about for hours and hours, and maybe we should over a drink after this session. There are as many papers saying that technology is going to create new jobs as there are papers saying technology is going to take away all the jobs. There are papers talking about what it's going to do to the geographical disbursement of the jobs. It's a very complex and nuanced topic. One thing I will tell you is that as of right now today, we are not yet seeing technological unemployment. But we are right now today seeing, as a direct result of technology and automation, increased inequality, which is the second thing that keeps me up at night. The Brookings Institute has observed that absolutely we are seeing a greater shift of wealth away from labor and towards capital. We've been seeing this since the mid-70s, when for the first time in human history, productivity and wages became decoupled. Productivity continues to rise, wages remain stagnant, and we're seeing this increase in inequality in every region of the world. This is the share of wealth going to the top 10% in all the regions all around the world. And the thing that really makes me nervous about this one is that if we've got this decoupling of productivity and wages, where the economy is doing great, but it's not reflected in how people are getting paid, then we have a situation where politicians can get up on stage and say, I'm doing a great job. GDP's up, unemployment's down, everybody's happy, vote for me. And meanwhile, you've got a huge section of the population going, hang on a minute, I'm not happy. This system is not working for me. I don't care if GDP's up. I don't care if unemployment's down. The only job I can get is $9 an hour. And I used to be a highly skilled X. I used to be a truck driver. I used to be a steel worker. I used to be a manufacturer. I used to do something. And now all I can get is a job at McDonald's. And what happens when you get this cover story that everything is great, and you get a huge chunk of the population who's saying, no, things are not great at all, is you get things like Donald Trump in office. But not just Trump. You get Bernie Sanders. You get Brexit. To a degree, you get Jacinda, right? It's like we're lucky in New Zealand. It's a much lesser pushback on the system, but it's all symptoms of the same core problem, the same message, which is the system is not working for me. That's the second thing that keeps me up at night. The third thing that keeps me up at night is increased cyber risk. When everything is connected, everything is vulnerable. This is just a small story from last month. The city of Atlanta was held hostage. All of the data in the city of Atlanta was held hostage by hackers. They demanded approximately $51,000 in ransom, which I thought was a really funny number. Like, if you're going to hold the data of an entire city hostage, surely you'd ask at least for like $1 million, right? Like, put a robust number on there. But they asked for $50,000 because it's a number they think people can easily agree to, right? Now, we don't know whether or not Atlanta paid the ransom. We do know they have spent, since this data attack a month ago, they have spent at least $1.6 million in trying to recover and secure their system so that the attack doesn't happen again. And when I say everything is connected, everything is vulnerable, I am not kidding. Everything is connected. A couple weeks ago, there was an attack on a casino that came in through a connected fish tank in the lobby of the casino. Like, everything is connected, and people can get into your network through any means necessary. But the fourth one is the one that I am most concerned about, and actually leads into the conversation. I know we've kind of gone on this really big tangent, and we will bring it back to museums, I promise you. But the fourth one is the one that I think where museums have potentially the biggest role to play. The fourth thing I'm concerned about is the undermining of trust in civil society. And I'm not just talking about the undermining of trust from things like Cambridge Analytica, using Facebook in order to kind of advance its own agenda, or trolls attacking us on Twitter, whatever it may be. I'm talking about a different kind of trust. If you've seen this video before, you probably don't want to admit to it. This is the face of Wonder Woman Gal Gadot superimposed onto the body of a porn star. It was uploaded to a website called Step Siblings Caught, purporting to show her having sex with her stepbrother. This video was made using a technology called deepfakes. Deepfakes, when it was first created, this kind of technology, you had to be pretty technically savvy in order to use it. Of course, within about 10 minutes, they've created a version that now anybody can use, so you can go online and you can upload your significant other and have your significant other starring in the Avengers if you want. But you can also use this technology for nefarious purposes, such as this one. Combine this with technology like this that allows you to control video of someone else using your face. So as this guy moves his face, it's a little hard to see, but as this guy moves his face, the face of Donald Trump is moving. He is actually using his face as a remote control for Donald Trump's facial expressions, and combine that with technology that allows you to generate convincing audio in pretty much anyone's voice. And we get a situation where you literally cannot trust anything you see and hear. And I just want to check in with, sorry, I forget your name. Do we have audio for the next presentation? Okay, just want to make sure because it's pretty important.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place, or, how about this, simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. It's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. It may sound basic, but how we move forward in the age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of fucked up dystopia. Thank you. And stay woke, bitches.
Jordan Peele makes the point far better than I ever could. And here's the thing that when I think about this technology and what the risks are with technology like this. The obvious risk, the most kind of linear, okay, what could you do with it, is that a malicious actor uses it in order to do harm. So somebody creates a video of Donald Trump saying, I've just launched nuclear weapons at North Korea, and it doesn't even have to be perfect. Like that video of Obama wasn't perfect, but it's good enough that unless you're really, really looking for it, you just have kind of a knee-jerk reaction to it. That's sort of the most obvious, blatant kind of thing to be concerned about. But there's a more insidious risk with this technology. which is, and please forgive me, I know this is super US-centric, and I did start by saying I'm a Kiwi, but I'm just totally obsessed with the train wreck that is US politics right now. So you may or may not recall that in the 2016 election, this tape came out that was Donald Trump on the Billy Bush tape. He was on a bus talking to Billy Bush, and he was bragging about sexually assaulting women. And when the tape came out, he was interviewed and he apologized for it. He said, yep, that was me, and I'm sorry, but it was just boy talk. And Melania said, oh, it's just boy talk. It's locker room talk, no big deal. And it was quite memorable because he actually apologized, and he never apologized for anything. So that was like, whoa, okay, that's impressive. So a couple months ago, when this technology came out, he was being interviewed, and he said, you know that Billy Bush tape? They're telling me that might not have been my voice on the tape. And so now where we get to is a situation where you don't even need a malicious actor creating a video with the intent of doing harm. We get to a situation where we literally can no longer agree on the facts of what we see and hear. This is something to be super, super attentive to. It threatens to undermine the basic tenets of our civilization, of our ability to communicate with each other, to agree at least on, okay, there is a video and that person is saying something, and maybe you don't like what they say and I do, but let's argue about that instead of whether there is actually a video of a person saying something. So that's the terror. But F. Scott Fitzgerald said, the mark of a first-rate mind is the ability to hold two opposing thoughts simultaneously and still retain the ability to function. By many metrics, 2017 was the best year ever in history. The smallest share ever of our population was hungry, impoverished, or illiterate. Every single day, 217,000 people are lifted up out of extreme poverty. Every single day, 325,000 people gain access to electricity. And every single day, 300,000 people gain access to clean water. In 2017, for the first time ever in certain parts of the world, it became cheaper to build and operate a new solar plant than it was to maintain an existing coal plant. Think about that for a second. Cheaper to build an entirely new plant than to maintain the existing one. All of a sudden, all the sunk cost arguments go completely out the window. And what's super exciting to me is when the incentives align, when the right thing to do for the planet aligns with the right thing to do for your bottom line, then we're going to see real transformation. That chatbot, the one that contested all the parking tickets, is now being used to help refugees claim asylum. And in Rwanda, they are using autonomous drones to deliver 20% of their rural blood supply, meaning people who need access to blood transfusions are now able to get it when they couldn't before. Technology, like I said, is enabling a world where anything is possible, but it is up to us to choose whether we want to use it to create a better world for everyone, an inclusive world, an abundant world, or whether we want to use it to go down the path we're already going down, where we continually concentrate wealth in the hands of the few at the expense of the many. When I first went to SU, I heard about all sorts of technologies I'd already heard about before. That, I'd heard about AI, I'd heard about robotics, I'd heard about self-driving cars. That wasn't the thing that was so transformative for me about my experience there. It wasn't that I heard about technologies that I'd never heard of before. The thing that really blew my mind was that the way that they took all of those disparate data points and pulled them together into a new coherent narrative that made me go, oh my gosh, like I see this in a completely different way to how I'd seen it before. And I want to just tell you a quick story to give you an example of what I'm talking about. So one of the things we talked about heaps when I was at SU was 3D printing. I had definitely heard about 3D printing before. No doubt, I did not realize until I got to SU that 3D printing has been around for over 35 years, probably close to 40 years now. That was news to me. And I was like, really? It's been around for that long? Because everyone I have ever spoken to about 3D printing, all they say is, oh my gosh, it's going to revolutionize everything. And what have we actually gotten? Shitty models of Yoda's head. Like, this is not revolutionary, right? There is no incumbent Yoda's head model industry that's freaking out right now because the MakerBots are coming. But so I leave SU with my new coherent narrative, my new paradigm, and a week after going to SU, I go to TED. And at TED, this guy, Joseph DeSimone, got up on stage, and he's like, 3D printing is terrible. This is terrible. And the reason it's so terrible is that it's not actually 3D printing at all. It's 2D printing over and over again, right? You print a layer, and then another layer, and another layer, and another layer. And so as a result, there are all sorts of problems with it. You can't really do bridges, you can't do spans, you can't do objects within objects. The mechanical tolerances are terrible, the structural integrity is terrible. It's super slow, and it's super expensive. So DeSimone's like, I don't want a 3D printer that's a 2D printer over and over again. I want a 3D printer that works more like the T-1000 from Terminator 2. I want my object to just emerge from the soup, fully formed. I want it to just be the thing. And so he built it. This is it. That's what he was there to launch. It's called CLIP, Continuous Liquid Interface Production. That plate at the top pulls the object fully formed from that tray of substrate soup at the bottom. It solves every issue with current 3D printing. You can do bridges, you can do spans, you can do objects within objects. The mechanical tolerances are perfect, the structural integrity is perfect. It's 25 to 100 times faster than current 3D printing technology. So I watched him give this talk, fresh from SU, with my new coherent narrative, my new paradigm. And I had 3 reactions, and my first reaction was what it would have been anyway, which was like, whoa, that's really cool. Nice work, dude. My second reaction, though, was, of course, it's 25 to 100 times faster. And not, 7% faster. Of course, as DeSimone says, the next iteration is going to be 1,000 times faster, because that's what an exponential curve looks like. And my third reaction was, now I get it. Now I get how 3D printing totally disrupts global manufacturing and freight. Because why would you ever pay to manufacture 20,000 of something in China and pay to ship it and pay to store it and have waste and have loss and have theft and have it go out of date when you literally can push the button and get the thing? We cannot use the past as a means of predicting the future. This past November, researchers at the Lawrence Livermore Lab came out with a new 3D printing technique using holography. It prints complete 3D objects in seconds. We cannot use the past as a means of predicting the future. But what the heck does all this have to do with museums? All right, everything is what I would suggest. And the way that I like to think about this is, what are the kind of 3 dimensions of change that are affected by these technologies? And the first one is where you're kind of taking what you're doing and automating. So Te Papa's incredible online collection, the wonderful talk we heard earlier from Digxibit about being able to track visitor movements and using big data in order to better deliver what you deliver. The second vector of disruption is where you use technology to actually transform visitor engagement, right? So this is an image from the great map at the National Maritime Museum in the US. It's a huge map on the floor. You walk through with an iPad, stuff jumps up out at you. The Curio technology that we heard about earlier, how can you interact with this stuff using technology? This is a virtual gallery from the Kramer collection in the Netherlands. These guys use photogrammetry, where they take thousands of pictures of an image, so you get this incredibly detailed reproduction. This is literally a virtual gallery. You put your headset on and you're there. And it's your private gallery with 70 old masters that you can walk right up to and inspect with whatever lighting you want, with whatever detail you want, with the tour guides right next to you, your personal tour guides. It's really astonishing stuff. But the third vector that I like to think about is the one that is most important, because no matter who I talk to, and I talk to literally tens of thousands of people every year about this stuff, no matter who I talk to, where this conversation inevitably goes, and generally pretty quickly, is towards what it means to be human. If we're talking about the future of work, and we're talking about a world in which pretty much all the jobs can be done by robots, what forms our self-identity? If we're talking about, we have to have these really fundamental conversations about the idea that we invented the concept of a 40-hour work week. That's a human invention. That's not a law of nature, a law of physics, right? We made that up. And so now we have to go, well, what would the world look like if we didn't have to have that? What would the world look like if it weren't about capitalism? What would the world look like? Our entire model of economics is based on scarcity, and exponential technologies drive towards freedom and abundance. What does the world look like if we have to throw away the entire economic model that underpins the way that we operate? Who do we become? We define ourselves by our work. Who do we become if we no longer have to work? What does it mean to be human if we have machines that can do virtually anything that we can do? These are really profound questions, and I would argue that museums are in a unique position to be able to foster and hold the space for this kind of conversation. The kind of conversation that is so essential for us to have as we go into this future that does not look like the past. And I want to give you just some examples of museums that are starting to tackle this stuff. This is an amazing exhibit. So this is where, instead of using the technology to interact with an artifact, like those amazing interactions we saw with the exhibit technology, we're using the technology is actually the subject of the provocation. So this is a wonderful work done by a lady named Heather Dewey Hagborg, and what she did is she went around New York and she picked up cigarette butts, and she picked up used chewing gum, she used gloves, and she extracted DNA from these objects. And then using the DNA, she was able to generate sculptured portraits of the people who had smoked those cigarettes or who had chewed that gum. And using DNA characteristics, things like from the DNA, she could identify whether these people had brown eyes or blue eyes, whether these people were tall or short, what color hair they might have had, whether they have a propensity towards being overweight or towards being thin. She made a whole exhibit. This is an example of a self-portrait that she did based on her DNA. And bear in mind, the portraits, the sculptures that she made were generic, right? They were just based on these kind of generic characteristics. But you may have heard recently about the Golden Gate Killer who was captured because they got his DNA and they were able to measure it against a public database. We're getting to very quickly to a situation where she'll be able to run this exhibit where she actually is picking up people's cigarette butts that they've left and generating portraits of the actual person who did that. And so we have all sorts of questions that need to be asked about privacy and ethics and what does it mean, and ownership. Do you own your DNA? What if you leave a cigarette on the ground? Does that mean that DNA is now public access? We've got questions about whether technology is making us more human or whether it's getting between us and our humanity and the people we want to connect with. A wonderful exhibition recently from the program called Experiments in Art and Technology, EAT, which is a collaboration between New Museum and Nokia Bell Labs. They worked with a group of fellows who came up with an exhibit called Only Human, which is on display at MANA Contemporary, again in New York. And just a couple of what they're doing, the exhibits that they're doing there. This is an exhibit called Blooming by a lady named Lisa Park. And basically they've got a full-size digital cherry tree, and if you stand on a pad with your shoes off with someone else next to you and look at the cherry tree, if you hold hands, the tree will bloom and the cherry blossoms will fall. And if you move apart, the tree will die. And so they're using the technology to provoke ways for us to be more intimate with each other rather than what we typically get, which is ways for us to be less connected to each other. This one's called Omnia per Omnia, and they're using satellite surveillance data from New York City video cameras, surveillance cameras, and she has a swarm of robots that are doing the painting according to the surveillance data that's being captured by the video cameras in New York. And again, these questions of privacy and these questions of public space versus private space become super, super critical. And really what it comes down to is, do we want to use technology as a means of being disconnected from each other, as a means of each of us going into our own world and forgetting that there are real live human beings right next to each other who might benefit from a kind word or from even just looking them in the eye? Or do we want to use technology to bring us closer together and to make us more human than we might otherwise be? Thank you very much. How are you doing? Are you all right? I was very worried about her. I tried to slow down.
Hey, thank you very much, Kaila. I think my mind's racing away, and I'm sure there's going to be many people in the room that will be joining you in sleeplessness tonight to think about all of those discussions. And so that leads nicely to an opportunity to ask Kaila some questions. I'm sure there's some opportunities to ask a little bit. I wanted to know really about myself about the actual moment when AI does make the creative decision. Is that?
Yep. So when we talk about AI, and I heard Alex speaking about AI in the previous session, which was awesome. Typically, when we talk about AI today, what we're talking about is what we call artificial narrow intelligence. So it's not generally intelligent the way that we are, where we can quickly adapt to a new environment. It's artificial intelligence that is trained to do a particular thing, such as play Go or recognize cats or tell you how to navigate a map. So we have today now artificial intelligence that can make creative decisions in the sense of an artificially narrow AI. We've got, for example, we've just printed the first span of the first 3D printed bridge in the Netherlands, which is really cool because the first ever 3D printed bridge, but the interesting thing is that the design of the bridge was created by AI. We have AIs that are what we call generative AIs. So you basically feed them, kind of point them in directions and give them a few parameters, and then they can create new concepts. We've got movies where the scripts have been generated by artificial intelligence. We have songs that have been written by AI. So we already live in a world where AI can make those creative decisions. What it can't do is make the decision to make the creative decision, if that makes sense. You can program it to do this and send it on its way, but it's not going to wake up one day and go, I feel like taking up painting, because that's a different kind of AI.
Okay. I'm just looking at Slido. What roles within a museum are safe from being replaced by technology?
You're all screwed. I would think, okay, so it's a very tricky question, and the answer is it depends on the time scale. Absolutely, the bots that Alex was talking about, they exist, they're already here, and they can absolutely be used to interact with people. In New Zealand, we have a company called Soul Machines that was created originally by Mark Sager, our wonderful Academy Award winner, Mark Sager. Soul Machines has bots that have totally humanoid characteristics, so it looks like you're talking to a person, and they talk back to you, and they learn as you talk to them. So we have these bots that really can do a lot of kind of customer service roles. The kind of jobs that are the most safe are the jobs that are the least repetitive. The job of curator, for example, I think we're a long way away from having a museum, having a curator replaced by an AI. What you could do, and I'll give you this one for free, is bring in an AI as a guest curator. So bring in an AI, feed it with, a million different possibilities, and say, okay, we're going to run an exhibit where the entire exhibit is curated by AI. And today that would be, something that would be interesting to explore.
Yes.
One of the things that we've been grappling with in our analog world is copyright and IPR, and it's a big issue in all sorts of areas in our sector. Cultural appropriation, let alone the ownership issues around fine art and the values and all of those things. And we've been discussing it a lot. I've been thinking about it a lot. Listening to you, I think I've come to the realization that not only am I not asking the right questions, I'm not even using the right language. Do you have any thoughts about how this brave new world you're conjuring up is going to impact on that issue?
Yeah, we're already seeing we've already seen a massive transformation in terms of copyright and IPR. I'll tell you what, I'm a super lefty liberal hippie. I am delighted that something like Creative Commons exists, and eternally grateful to Larry Lessig and Aaron Swartz for spearheading that initiative. I think that life for everyone becomes a lot easier if our focus is on where we can go, what more we can deliver, how vast our conception of the world can be, and away from how do we protect the thing we already have. That's me. A lot of people don't agree with me on that. One of the things that I looked at when I was researching for today's talk was a museum called Rabbit Town. I don't know if you guys have heard about this Rabbit Town place in Indonesia, maybe? I might be wrong on that. But it's basically a selfie museum. And they have shamelessly copied a ton of exhibits from all over the world that lend themselves to selfies. So like bananas hanging from the ceiling and a room full of dots, and I forget who the artist was who originally created the dots, but they basically like copied all these other exhibits. And the guy who created it's like, oh no, I had dreams about dots. I've always thought about dots and stickers, so it has nothing to do with copying. And the thing is, like, that artist can spend a lot of time and energy trying to chase up to claim that person's rights and fight these people in Indonesia, or that artist, and this is maybe thoughtless to say, and there'll be people who are in this situation who totally disagree with me, and I respect that, but that artist could also go, okay, cool, I did that, now it's been copied, what am I gonna do next, right? Am I gonna spend my time in this sort of depressive, argumentative fighting state, or am I going to spend my time in my generative, creative state, which is the place I like to be? So I know that's a very kind of simplistic Pollyanna way to think about it. That would be the preference of the kind of world I'd like to see us moving towards.
I have a question about exponential doubling and our human race.
Yeah.
So our population has doubled 32.5 times, and every 39 to 100 years, it's sort of predictable. What do we do with all this technology, all this artificial intelligence, all this stuff that's whiz-bang, interesting on the slide, but when our population goes around the moon, like your example?
Yep, cool, great question. So first of all, the current best predictions are that we're going to level off in terms of population. And certainly one of the things that we've seen already is that the single biggest thing we can do to slow population growth is to educate women and girls. And so in countries where we've had better education of women and girls and greater access to birth control, these are the two biggest things if we want to look at any kind of controlling population. Educating women and girls, greater access to birth control, greater health care, because all of a sudden if you go, oh, if I have a kid, that kid is likely to survive and become a functioning grown-up, instead of my kid is highly likely to die and therefore I better have 10 kids because who knows, which one's going to make it through. So those are things that we can look at, and the current trajectories are that we look to level off at I think it's 10 or 12 billion. That's still a big number, don't get me wrong. So then the question is, okay, well, what do we do with all those people? And I think it's interesting because there are a lot of people, a lot of the Silicon Valley kind of techno billionaire tech bro guys who are focusing a lot of their efforts with these technologies on longevity. And many people, including Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis, who are really focused on how can we achieve immortality, which is like, guys, you know what, we've got some other issues that maybe we can address first before figuring out how to make you two live forever. So I think we need to be, this is part of the reason that I do what I do, is to help more people understand this stuff, so we go, okay, we actually are in a position where we can make choices about, do we deploy these technologies to help a handful of rich people live forever, or to help provide a better life for the billions of people who don't have access to, forget about the opportunities that those guys have, who don't have access to kind of the basic needs of life that we all enjoy in this room. So then the question is, okay, well, how can we provide for all those people? And there's lots of back and forth about this. I mentioned solar before. We're certainly getting into a world where we have the potential to provide energy that is much vaster and more abundant than what we currently have, that is not depletive of our natural resources. Again, all of these topics, the more you dig into them, the more complex they become. So if you look deeply at solar, then you get to a point where you go, okay, the rare minerals, do we have enough of that? Can we, et cetera, et cetera. With one of the groups that I talk to a lot is the primary sector. In the primary sector, we're starting to see massive disruption where we're shifting away from traditional farms and towards indoor farms. LED lighting and the other technologies associated with indoor farms have been progressing exponentially in terms of price performance. So now we have indoor farms that are, 130 times, 300 times more productive per square foot than a traditional farm. We are seeing bioengineered meat that is now becoming absolutely price competitive with traditional meat. And when I spoke at the beginning of my talk, I talked about what has to happen for a technology to become ubiquitous. And I mentioned it's not enough for the technology to be ready. The regulatory environment, the market appetite, the investment environment, all those things have to come together. When it comes to meat alternatives, whether that's plant-based or bioengineered meat, we are absolutely reaching that tipping point where all of those things are starting to align. And that is, again, transformative in terms of our land use, in terms of our emissions, et cetera. All that being said, if you're not worried about climate change, then you're not paying attention to climate change. Like this, there's a good chance we've already passed a tipping point in terms of climate change, and it doesn't matter whether we go to 12 billion or stay at 7. We're going to be in trouble either way. So good. So if you weren't already depressed from my talk, you can take that one home for free. All right. Any more? Are we done?
I think we're done. There's room, one more question. Okay, look, I just thank you very much. That's an inspiring talk, and it's left me thinking what next for us as an industry, and it certainly left me confident in the knowledge that we provide something that's real and that audiences will relate to in new ways through technology, but also through the pleasure of the artifacts and the objects that we look after. But we may have to open after 5 o'clock at night from now on, or earlier in the morning, perhaps. Anyway, let's put our hands together and thank Kaila for that.
Thank you.